Okay, I was going to let Anna continue introducing herself, but just to say that she's one of the people who started sharing very early about your experiments with AI. And I think you've been tremendously helpful to everyone around the world with sharing everything that you've been learning, what you've been reading, what you've been experimenting with. And I'm very grateful that you're here with us today to share some more of that.
Thank you so much, Maha. I've learned so much from you about this subject, and it's been such a gift to collaborate on it. So I've been teaching writing at two-year colleges in the San Francisco Bay Area since 2005, and I got involved in the open educational resources space, making a textbook about writing. And then I sort of was hypnotized by AI in June 2022, and kind of dove into what do we do about this and with it. And so I made a resource list through the Writing Across the Curriculum Clearinghouse, and I've been writing on the topic. And I did a little bit of testing for OpenAI. So I've been yeah, I guess engaged in the writing and AI discussion on social media, and learning about how can we do that with open educational practices, really from Maha and others. So see, I'm going to share my screen. So today I'm so glad to be invited to talk about AI activities for the writing and language classroom. And we kind of did the welcome, sharing the names and how we were feeling, but I like to start with just a note that I definitely don't feel like I have definitive answers on what we should do and what the best practices are. There's been no time for that, right? So we're in this space of exploring together and trying things and reflecting on it. And I think I really love the vulnerability and the need for dialogue that come with that. There's a lot of energy in that. So that's the spirit in which I want to present on it. So I do have the slides available for commenting, and all the links are in there. I just put that in the chat. I'm going to focus on sort of two sections. One is how we might frame and introduce AI with students before we use it pedagogically. And then the second is some ways to approach using it in the classroom, teaching about it and with it, specifically text generation AI I'm going to focus on, so large language models. And, feel free to put questions in the chat. We will have a couple of interactive moments where we do polls and you can share your thoughts. Maybe I'll let Maha or Hoda stop me if there's a question that needs to be answered urgently before we get to that interactive moment, since we're so many, but they can stop me anytime. So I like to start just grounding us in a framing. I know, we've been hearing a lot about AI and text generators like ChatGPT. So these are not new to us at this point, I think. But it's still maybe helpful to frame it and ground it in terms of how do we think about them? What are they? What's the essence of this? And I keep coming back to the word statistics. That these are systems that are generating a series of words, and it's based on their statistical analysis of lots of human text. They're predicting likely next words, they're copying patterns. They're sort of asking this question, what would the humans write next? How would a human writer likely continue on from this prompt? So if we keep that in mind, I think that helps to frame what we're working with here. Since I know that, we tend to focus on that phrase ChatGPT, But I think it's also important to highlight that this is just one of, a suite of language models from different companies. And I know it's hasn't been accessible in Egypt, but some of these others are accessible. So we're also talking about Anthropic's Claude.ai. Increasingly, these other systems are closer in quality and sophistication to ChatGPT. Meta's Llama, Google's Bard, Microsoft's Bing, which is based on the same software as ChatGPT. And then, there are sites that let you compare and use different ones, like Poe.com. So, if we framed a large language model, let's try to frame, how do we think about where to start if we're considering using AI in our teaching? And increasingly, we hear that interest and the excitement and maybe the rhetoric of let's embrace it, or let's at least teach students about it. So, I just want to acknowledge that there are this wonderful explosion of collections of ideas for how to do this. Maybe starting with this open collection from Creative HE in the UK, 101 Creative Ideas to Use AI in Education. Recently, we had Text Gen Ed, a peer-reviewed collection from the Writing Across the Curriculum Clearinghouse, come out. Learn with AI, curated by John Ippolito, University of Maine. And each of these has, dozens of activity ideas. Very soon, the AI Pedagogy Project that I'm on an advisory group for is going to come out with another one. Thank you for putting those in the chat. So, this is wonderful, but it can be quite overwhelming. So before I throw ideas at you, I wanted to figure out how to frame what we're looking for. What do we hope to see come out of our use of AI or teaching about AI? So one point I want to start with is just this idea that students will need guidance and understanding around AI as it's becoming widely available, integrated into writing environments. We know that this is sort of in beta in Google Docs to the point where it's just there all the time as a help me write button. And so students need to know, what is this? What is it? What is it not? What kinds of problems does it bring with it? And policy-wise, how could they have a role in shaping its future? So those things, I think, are becoming a essential part of digital literacy, right? So that's one thing that we might have as a goal, is to start guiding students around those. Let's see, I think I skipped a slide. Yeah. So I'm just going to throw out kind of my work in progress goals for integrating AI. The first one is to support existing learning goals. So besides that, teaching students about AI, we also want to, we don't want to abandon what we're already trying to do, right? I don't want AI to replace something that was an essential teaching practice. So keeping and furthering the goals that we have, and building that digital literacy, that critical AI literacy, by helping students recognize the problems with text generation AI. And that's both for practical workplace reasons. So maybe that's how you add value in a workplace where there's a lot of AI, is you can see where it's wrong and you can say something and you can catch that problem, right? So from an economic perspective, you've got to be able to recognize those problems. And from sort of a civic participation and political and personal empowerment and all these other reasons to critique AI, you also need to know those same things. And then another point is to boost a student confidence and sense of the value of their own voice and their human judgment. So my dream is that whatever activity I pick would kind of have those effects. And I want to share kind of this tentative approach to see if it's useful to you. That basically is micro lessons on framing AI, on what AI is and isn't, before we bring it in, before we invite students to use it. And then trying to plan a learning activity that does the things I mentioned, that gives students a chance to practice identifying its limitations, risks, and ethical concerns. So the idea of a micro lesson, I think, is partly that, we can't make every class an AI class without abandoning everything else we're teaching, right? And I don't think we should. So let's think about ways that are kind of manageable, accessible for instructors as well as for students, that are kind of baby steps. And I think that there are some really brief and engaging ways to do this. So there's, I just shared a TikTok video that's 3 minutes. It doesn't have diverse representation, but it is a pretty clear and accessible explanation of that predictive text idea that ChatGPT doesn't understand. And here's another one that's from a couple of years ago, but is really excellent on the same subject from Vox, and that's 7 minutes. And they talk with Janelle Shane, who's a wonderful and funny expert on the topic. Another favorite I have is this New York Times interactive reading. Let us show you how GPT works using Jane Austen. And I kind of wish they hadn't used Jane Austen because not everybody loves Jane Austen, but probably Harry Potter has wider reach globally. So I think it's funny how they show how a language model is trained and how it starts with kind of gobbledygook, almost gibberish. And then over time, it starts to look more like what we might be familiar with from Harry Potter, the kinds of words and the character names, but it still doesn't really make sense. So you start to get a sense of how the language patterns come together without the meaning really driving it. So the sample from that article is Hermione raised her wand. Professor Dumbledore never mimed Harry. So, some things make sense, some things don't. Harry Potter is controversial, certainly. That's true. Yeah. But so with this article, you can pick, and there's also Star Trek: The Next Generation. I mean, it's not really a global selection. So it'd be great to find something with a more global perspective, but that's what I got at this point. Another favorite that I've used for 2 semesters now is a free course from the University of Helsinki on elements of AI. And the very beginning of that course defines AI in a very accessible way. So I've assigned students to annotate that reading. These are not perfect, but I think John Oliver, sort of talk show host and comedian, did a very well-researched show on artificial intelligence that was quite humorous. There was more swearing than my 12-year-old son appreciated, but I would consider that as well. So those are just kind of the general introduction to what is AI. But we might also, consider a micro lesson on a particular aspect of critical AI literacy that we consider crucial before students are going to interact with these systems. We might talk about privacy, fabrication when they make things up, bias, and this lack of understanding. We might also do labor, AI colonialism, intellectual property, environmental impact. I haven't gotten micro lessons for those last 4 yet, but I would like to. And I think it might be possible to do just the quick, you know, how is this part of our lives now? And what does it look like? So for privacy, I think this is an idea I should put on the slide from Autumn Keynes to, she recommends commenting on the OpenAI privacy policy with students. But, as a micro lesson, I would just say, let's look at it with them, show them the document and highlight a couple phrases that they can use personal information to improve their services and conduct research. So that's very, very broad so that students know, and you could do this with the policy for any other chatbot so that students know that what they're sharing there is not, they can't count on it being confidential, and it might be used to support the model and its profit. Now for fabrication, which sometimes gets called hallucination, but that sounds too much like the model is sentient, is dreaming. It's really just making things up. Let's actually, it's different to share and show them how it makes something up, and really than just to say that it makes things up, right? So just to show them that, and to show them that what it's made up is wrong, show a credible source. And that can be so simple. I'm going to do it. Sorry. But I did some experiments with that, and I don't know if this one really stood out to me. So, and I've linked to the session so you can see the whole session here. But I asked ChatGPT, can you give 5 quotes by Tawfiq Hakim? And I may be saying the name wrong. I apologize. And so ChatGPT says, certainly. And it gives 5 quotes, which it says are attributed to him. And I looked those quotes up, and they started to come up as coming from other people. So I said, let me try, can you tell me who really wrote each of those quotes? And it said, of course, let's clarify the sources of those quotes. It appears that they were inaccurately sourced. Not one of them was really attributed to him, and they were attributed to other people, most of them Western European canonical writers. Thank you, Maha, for sharing that session. So, that's just a case of it's sort of very blithely and confidently telling us something that's completely wrong. And if we push it, it acknowledges that it's completely wrong, as if that didn't matter. As if, oh, sure, yeah.
Anna, was it more likely to make that mistake with an Arab or Egyptian writer than it would have done when you asked it for Western authors? Because I'm sure you tested it with a lot of different.
I think it was, yeah. When I tested it on Shakespeare, I had to keep going and asking for more and more quotes before I found like 2 that were fabricated, that were made up. So yeah, much more likely, I think. And
with students, would you ask them to verify in some other way, or would you ask them to keep asking ChatGPT?
No, I would show them, actually, and I should have put a screenshot of that. I would show them the, say, goodreads.com quotation page that actually attributes those quotes to other people. So I would show them that other credible source that grounds us here, that, we have to do that internet research and evaluate the credibility of those other sources, and trust them over ChatGPT. I would show that in class. That's interesting. Fabrication has connotations of intent. Yeah, I could see that. It's hard, if there's a better word, if anybody comes up with something,
Anna,
to
that was
that.
great. It was in response to what Huda said about the difference between hallucination and fabrication, and I was thinking that they both have their connotations. So I'm not criticizing the use of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, understood. Yes.
Anna, someone was asking, how did they find out the quotes that are not from Hakim? And Anna, do you want to just do one really quick live? Would you be willing to show it live?
Sure.
Like just do one real quick?
What would you like me to try? You mean?
Try the Naguib Mahfouz again, or
Okay.
like just try asking it and then showing like what would you show student? Okay, right. Oh yeah. What would you like the process that you would show students? Just show us how that would work.
Sure.
So you're
Sure.
inside ChatGPT now.
Okay. So see. So here I said, can you give me 5 quotes by Naguib Mahfouz? And I'm probably saying that wrong. I'm sorry.
No, that's close.
And then all I did was to take the quotes it gave me, copy them, put that in quotes into Google, and it comes up from one of these quote sites like Brady Quote or Goodreads as attributed to Mahfouz. So that one is I would consider to be confirmed. We could talk about, why is Goodreads credible, but I would do that. And in this case, I think most of them were. But when I kept asking, we got some that I believe were not. Time has its own secrets. Only time can reveal the secrets of time. Which
one of the ones I remember you and I were talking about was it brought that quote about like learners are not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be kindled, which is a very, very old Greek quote, and it was attributing it to like Taha Hussein. I think, yeah, maybe it's the one.
Oh, that's right. And it was Seneca or something.
Yeah. Oh, but maybe it came up for me, but not for you. You have other ones.
Okay. Yeah, so like this one doesn't exist. ChatGPT made it up. Time has its own secrets. Only time can reveal the secrets of time. Actually, that's pretty meaningless to me. And then I think the only paradise is paradise lost turned out to be somebody else. Proust, right? So no, that is not Mahfouz. And there's almost a sense of disrespect in the way it mixes those other quotes in, as if the meaning didn't matter and writers are interchangeable. Of course, that's not intended, but that's an effect of how it's trained on just all these volumes of text. And yes, certainly, if I use a search like Bing Chat, that would look up internet sources, it would take me to real sources, yes. But even in that case, it might misrepresent what those sources say. And I think what I'm trying to show here in the micro lesson is just that it sounds confident and it's not fundamentally concerned with truth.
It's also not concerned with quality. So like something someone revealed yesterday, and I haven't tested this, but someone said it yesterday about Illicit, which helps with literature review, and it brings real sources. And she said, but how come this is my area of research and I've never seen these sources before? And it turned out that they were redacted. They were peer-reviewed redacted sources. So it doesn't judge the quality. Like, so if you search Google Scholar, it will rank them based on citations, which should be like a measure of something, right? And apparently, I don't know what the AI, I guess it doesn't have a particular rule. So there's, even if it's a real source, it's not necessarily the best source because not every real source is a credible source, right? So like we're reaching the point of just, we want to make sure it's a real source, but just because it's a real source doesn't necessarily mean it's accurate.
Right. That's
Sure, that
true.
are good quality.
And we have to be careful with attributions on other websites as well. So I think that fundamental point that it's creating plausible text. It's not concerned with truth. It's not checking. Even when it's connected to the internet, that still has an effect. So to go on, I think another way to show that it's kind of it's driven by human data, including very biased human data. Core lesson might be to show how it's biased. And I found these very short videos to be really powerful. One with Sophia Umoja Noble, who wrote the book Algorithms of Oppression and really was a kind of a pioneer in critiquing the way that Google search perpetuated and amplified kind of racism. And Joy Buolamwini, an MIT researcher who looked at how facial recognition software is racially biased, and both of them looking at intersectional racism and the effects on women of color. And they're just amazing speakers. And these videos are really well done. And they're just, I think they're like, one is 3 minutes and one is 5 minutes or something. And another quick way, article, an interactive article that I really love that's new to me is how AI reduces the world to stereotypes. And this one looks at image generators and when you ask them just for, say, a Mexican person, they give a very, very stereotypical and limited response. And the article goes through that in a number of different global contexts and explains why that is. But I think even sharing the images with students and talking about how limited they are could be a really quick and still memorable lesson.
There was a very funny, some Instagrammers from Lebanon asked it to give Barbie dressed in different Arab clothes, and it was so stereotypical and ridiculous because it made like Arab women from a certain country dressed like a man, because that's all the context it had. That was like
Oh,
very
wow.
interesting.
I think there was a whole Barbie project on BuzzFeed that was just, globally so many offensive stereotypes when they did a Barbie from each country. So that could be another one just to focus on. And then, just still keeping it really simple and bite-sized. I loved that there's a very quick and simple way to show that ChatGPT doesn't get it or AI doesn't get it. There are certain things that can seem so clever and have such incredible facility with language that's responsive to the prompt. And then there are ways, if you ask it how many N's are in the word counter, I just tried this and it says it has 2 N's in it, right? So that's not a sentient thinking, processing, understanding being. So hopefully that could give that intuitive sense that there's a weird algorithm going on here, but it's it doesn't get it. So I thought I'd pause here and see, like, what approach would you take to that initial framing of AI before you start to use it or do a whole lesson with it? What do you think of this idea of micro lessons, and what might you start with in your framing? So I have a little Mentimeter. You can scan the QR code, or you can go to this link, which I will put in the chat. Or you can go to menti.com and enter 56285048. And yeah, we will definitely look up the Barbie Instagram posts. So yeah, I'll leave a moment for folks to get to that Mentimeter and just put in, how would you frame it initially? Interesting. So people are saying someone says as a co-pilot to support student learning and engagement. Micro lesson on fabrications. Great. Oh, great. You have a micro lesson. Someone has a micro lesson on the foundations of it. Wonderful. Always glad to see more approaches. Explain where the data comes from. Yeah, maybe that should be the first micro lesson. So with large language models, looking at what kind of text do they have and who is it from, and did they have permission to use it? A writing assistant rather than a knowledge creator. That's interesting. So people are saying this framing of, we could say that it's not there to supplant us. We could think of it more as intelligence augmentation rather than an intelligence of its own. That is, I think, really helpful reorientation to AI. Prompt provider, don't know. Don't surrender your own voice or critical thinking skills. They're more needed than ever. Absolutely. And I'm hoping that some of these micro lessons sort of showcase why that's important. If it doesn't have understanding and it's biased and it's making things up, that really shows the urgency of why we need our own skills. Great. Demystify. It's not magic. It's not all powerful. It's not Superman. It's a device. It's an algorithm. Yeah, I love that. An upgraded Wikipedia of the generative AI era. Interesting. Upgraded Wikipedia. Kind of like an interactive Wikipedia. Yes, except that Wikipedia has this incredible editorial process, right? Where humans are constantly involved in checking everything and fixing. And AI completely lacks that. So maybe the comparison to Wikipedia could be really interesting. The creation of a larger digital divide, privacy, legislative, and copyright issues. Wonderful. So I will share this whole list after. You're not able to see your own response. Let me see. That's interesting. You should be able to see all the responses, but no. I may have to share it after because I don't see a way to do that this second. But thank you for letting me know that. Okay, I want to go on because I don't want to run out of time. So options for incorporating it more extensively pedagogically. There are so many, but the one that I'm personally drawn to right now that I'm going to use, share some examples of, is to essentially to critique AI performance on a specific writing or language skill that we want to teach for its own sake, right? So, this would mean students are looking at AI output and they're reflecting on that, whether it's turning it in as a writing piece of its own or posting in a discussion, or my favorite is annotating, social annotation, so they're seeing each other's responses to the chat session transcript. And that could be, we might feed them the chat session transcript, or the next level would be to invite them to generate on their own through some kind of system, but that's not even necessary. We can start with giving them a transcript and then scaffolding that, kind of building confidence and building the critical approach in the sense of the different ways it might be wrong, even though it sounds good. I'm working on a list of template phrases to share with students, just to suggest to them the possibilities for that. And I'll put that link in the chat too. I'm big on templates in my textbook, so that was a go-to for me. Just to give a more sense of, you can do it. Here are some things that are familiar that you could try. Sort of, this sounds plausible, but it really doesn't make sense because blank, right? The speaking back to it. And I'm going to share some examples of these approaches that have been tested by the contributors to the Writing Across the Curriculum Clearinghouse Text Gen Ed collection. So these are not just kind of my brainstorms, but for example, Juan Pablo Pardo Guerra at University of California, San Diego, gives students a chat session, AI generated text, and ask them to comment on it, review it using track changes, and to critique it in that way. And a core skill that I teach is sort of critical reading for accurate summary. So I've seen a number of different variations of activities where you ask ChatGPT to give a summary of something, and then you find the problems with that summary. You speak back to it. So you have to read more deeply to see where it's wrong, even when it's plausible. And so, we had examples of that in professional writing from Heidi McKee and Timothy LaQuintano in Text Gen Ed. And that can also be a micro lesson, I think, if we're using sort of an AI enhanced search, that's always summarizing, right? So something like Bing Chat or Google's Bard or Perplexity AI is nice because students don't have to sign in to use it. It's going to give you a link, and it's going to tell you what's in the link, but sometimes what it says is in the link is not really the main message of that document, or it misrepresents it. So that one sentence summary is a chance to sort of critique AI. And this is kind of a fun way to teach, a little bit more creative way to teach reading comprehension and summary. Daniel Hutchinson and Aaron Jensen in Text Gen Ed suggested, I think they were working with a US kind of founding Declaration of Independence. And they invited students to ask a chatbot to explain a passage using an example with the student's pop culture reference of choice. So, that was fanciful, that was fun, but it was able to do it well enough. But they asked students to evaluate exactly how well it explained it. That example explained the meaning of the passage. One that I came up with was to actually critique a critical assessment. So this was a few steps, but I gave students a New York Times article, and then I gave them a sample student assessment of that article and a sample ChatGPT assessment of it. And I've got links to all of those in the slides. But the idea was to look at what did ChatGPT miss, and what did it get right? And, this comes after the micro lessons or a little bit longer lessons, in my case, about language models. So how does what we're seeing fit what we know about language models? And how might the student essay have turned out if the student had started with the ChatGPT output? What might they have never thought of or come up with that they did come up with on their own? Critiquing AI, quote unquote, research. So we looked at the quotes example. I just did another one that's a little bit similar where we collaboratively annotated. And when I say annotated, I'm talking about those apps like you could just do it in Google Docs with comments. But you can use these apps that sync with the learning management system, and I'll put their names in the chat. Makes it social. So I had students look at a whole bunch of claims about AI that ChatGPT made. So I asked it to give me surprising claims about AI, or not claims, I said surprising things about AI and sources. And so then we looked they on their own tried to research if those sources were real, if they were accurately represented and summarized. And we found in class that it had made, most of them were real, but it had made this one up, and it had combined two different sort of AI celebrity figures into one, with the first name of one and the last name of the other. So Jan Bengio doesn't exist. So it was fun to sort of do that live check with them and see that something that looked so good, and all the other ones were good, but this one was just not real.
Anna, there was a question in the chat about Perplexity versus ChatGPT, and I found myself answering it, but maybe you have more experience.
Oh, thank you. I think that, yeah, I think that Perplexity is sort of more of a search engine with some chat capability, in the sense that, yes, it can access websites and sort of process them as part of its input. It might give you something more accurate, but I don't think it's going to give you as extensive sort of text generation as
Hang on a second, someone needs to be muted. I'm just going to mute everyone.
Okay.
Okay, Anna, I muted everyone, so unmute
Oh,
yourself.
thanks. Okay.
But whoever is unmuting themselves keeps unmuting themselves. I'm trying to.
Interesting. Okay.
Okay, I think we're okay now, though. Go ahead.
Thank you. So, you know, in Text Gen Ed, there's another similar assignment that I really loved, where
you're hearing it too, right?
I am, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
let me try this again. All right, if someone knows who this person is, just
okay.
let me know in the private and I'll just focus on it.
Okay.
Okay, unmute yourself again, Anna. Sorry, you keep getting muted.
Okay. So this was kind of a gamified, you know, checking, fact checking. So Nathan Murray and Elisa Tersini, they gave students 3 readings. One of them was AI generated, one was sort of conspiracy theory, human written, and one was fact checked, human written. They didn't tell them which was which, and they were about whether aliens built the pyramids or something like that, or whether the moon landing really happened. They tried a couple different things. And they had students reflect on how credible they thought those articles seemed. And that led to a whole discussion of credibility and disinformation, both AI generated and human generated. And another critique approach is to look at how these language models sort of promote standard English and sort of promote the power structure around standard English, sort of from a global and a racial justice perspective. So, you know, there are a lot of ways we could do this, but cultivating that awareness of how those assumptions and biases are built in linguistically, and the system, like I was just testing this and people were jumping in on X yesterday. The first reaction when I asked it to generate a poorly written sample student paragraph, it sort of generated something that wasn't very plausible. And then I asked it, make up a description of a fictional character who wrote that paragraph and describe them physically. And it described a brown young man with a stereotypically African-American name. Now, other people were testing this on different chatbots and getting some different results. One person got all Latina women, one person got all white people on a different system. So, you know, this should be done systematically, but we will find evidence of this kind of linguistic bias. And it's a chance to discuss that and expose that with students, I think. Now, a bit more, I think, controversial is this question of do we invite students to use AI for particular steps in the writing process? And I think I'm seeing a lot of people working with that and inviting students either to use it for allowing it to revise their work once they've drafted it, or use it for a brainstorm, or give it a brainstorm and ask it for the outline, or give it the brainstorm and ask it for a thesis. I haven't done that yet. I'm nervous about it. I'm intrigued. I understand that, you want to support students and build their confidence. And if they can get to a certain point, maybe that's positive and they'll get further. But my fear is that students who don't have that confidence, when the AI is right there in the writing process so early, and it sounds so good, even I have that tendency to think, oh, maybe, yeah, I should go with that. And students even more so, right? If they're not feeling like they belong in academic discourse and they hear something that sounds so academic, will they just go with it? And will they skip that part of the writing process that helps with thinking, even though it's frustrating sometimes? So I haven't invited that kind of involvement in the writing process myself. But others have, and you can definitely read their experiments in those collections that I mentioned. But I have gravitated, along with others, toward using it for review. So the idea that it's not writing, the student is still doing all those steps in the writing process, but it might be used to give some feedback to supplement peer review. And this is partly also coming from Antonio Bird in Text Gen Ed. He sort of first did the peer review from his own comments and student comments, and then he asked students to cast careful judgment on the responses from the large language model, and he pointed out the misinformation, or show that it might have misconstrued the intent. So again, sort of that critical AI literacy piece being emphasized by the teacher, even though it's useful as feedback, but it's also problematic and not trustworthy. So I am still getting permission to use this app. I think it's almost in place. All the privacy security issues, I think, have been addressed. But the app myessayfeedback.ai is coming from sort of an open educational resources edtech developer. And the idea there is to, again, to supplement human feedback, because what's the point without humans reading the piece? But there's a layer of metacognition in inviting students to reflect on what kind of feedback they want. What do they want to do with their writing? So putting those guardrails in place, where we remind students that the feedback might not be good, or it might not match their purpose, also allows for that critical AI literacy experience of when it's wrong, seeing when it's wrong. So you can see in the app, like, they would pick, what do I want encouragement right now, or do I want to know about my thesis? Or do I just want to know that my writing is clear? And do I want to find out what could be clarified, right? So the instructor can make up different kinds of feedback and give instructions for them. And then the student either could be asked to use a certain kind, or allowed to choose. And it's supervised. So then the instructor sees what feedback they're getting. They can ask the instructor for help. They're prompted to reflect on it critically. And there's been some pretty decent feedback coming through this system. It will even quote from the student essay to support a point. Many of the suggestions have been decent, but not all. And I'm experimenting with asking it to give either bad feedback or conflicting feedback, and then having the student, pushing the students to decide what they think the bad feedback was and what the good feedback was. again, to just foreground that experience and that practice of seeing when it's wrong. It's currently free in a pilot phase. No specific plans to charge, but at some point there might be a cost. The priority is to keep that as low as possible. Yeah. So this was just a sample point. I thought it made a good suggestion about what could be clarified and why, with specific references to the student text. And again, sort of nudges, it links to those, a set of template phrases for reflecting on AI feedback, just to, again, boost student confidence and nudge students to see where it gets things wrong, and to help clarify their own purpose in that process. So phrases like these. And I'm sorry, we're running out of time a little bit.
Yeah, will we have time for questions?
I think I'm almost done. And yeah, we can go to questions. I just wanted to sort of put in a nod to the idea of offering an alternative if we do ask students to use AI. If they have concerns about that, to offer an equivalent assignment, and to shout out to Catherine Conrad's Blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights for Education that recommended that. But yeah, I'm ready for comment, questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to the second Mentimeter, but I'm happy to take questions. You're welcome to still put your feedback into this Mentimeter. And I will send out the results of those after the fact, so we can see what others are feeling and thinking, if you have the time to share.
So there's a question in the chat, and I think it's going to be easier to take questions from the chat. And I think if maybe people can keep putting questions in the chat, if we can't answer them now, we can maybe respond to them in some other way. The one we have right here is from Kyle. If there's one suggestion you'd give to a cohort of faculty that are vocally resistant to using AI in teaching writing, what would that be? And a lot of people saying thank you for a fruitful and fantastic session.
Thank you. I think I would just say, focus on how does our expertise help students contextualize and understand AI, since they're going to encounter it in writing environments. So, as writing teachers, our voices should be part of shaping that narrative around what is this, and not just why do you not use it, but how do you think about it if you're asked to use it in a workplace, and what might be involved? What are the concerns? What is this beast, right? So even if you're opposed to it, think about your own expertise with writing and how valuable that is in framing this software for students. Not necessarily that you have to use it for everything, or encourage them to use it for everything, right? There can be limits. Thanks for the survey in the chat. So appreciate any feedback. And sorry there wasn't more time for questions. I could always feel like I could just go on and on once we get going in these sessions. But I'm not in any rush. So if anyone does have questions, feel free to continue.
Thank you so much for your generosity to stay longer. Okay, here's a question from Ilkim.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's the question, the name. Difference in interpretation writing process for non-native student writers. That's a great question.
Well, I think that there might be, there's this idea that language models kind of open up access to a language of power or to standard English. So, I think we have to acknowledge that the incredible power that they have, and the benefits of that, as well as pitfalls for English language learners. If those students are less ready to evaluate the problems with the AI text, we want to build in those experiences where they still can see where it's wrong, or where they wouldn't want to go with its suggestion, even though it sounds so authoritative. I think that's what I've encountered with students who are English language learners, is that there's maybe even more of an appeal. And so I think building trust with those students for me is really important, and listening to their feelings and experiences with engaging with a language model, and kind of accessing that ability to churn out text that's so polished that projects that, correctness and power and fluency. I think looking at that emotional dimension is important in my mind. But yeah, that's what I've got at this moment for that topic.
I mean, I've definitely seen my students do this, use AI to make themselves look better, and instead they make themselves look like stupid users of AI because they're not using it well. And I keep telling them, I don't mind you using AI, but you're not using it properly. You're just making yourself look like you're using difficult words, but you don't understand them. There was another question in the chat. I'm just
You
gonna
see about
scroll up.
openly licensed materials? Does it I don't know. I know that it might be at Hugging Face has a lot of open licensed language models where the software itself is open licensed, but not necessarily the training data. My impression is that you couldn't get something of similar capacity to ChatGPT only with open licensed materials, because you just need such a high volume of text. But you could get a smaller language model using that. And sometimes using a smaller model, or the Hugging Face model, is a great approach, because it showing the clunkiness of a less capable model shows that it's not understanding. It sort of shows the algorithmic nature and the data-driven nature. So it's great for students to get a feel for that. Will we ever know what the training data included? I mean, I think that's a question. Another thing I wanted to put in was about, 2024 as a year for AI regulation, hopefully globally. There's a lot of push toward that. And there's a lot of concern about transparency around what data was used to train these models, and whether it was even legal to use that data, or whether there were copyright violations. So I think I think that the message that, that instructors, educators, and students are, our voices are needed in this larger societal conversation about what information we should demand and government should demand about these systems. Do we need some kind of licensing for AI, testing of AI, show that it's safe, show that it's not biased before you release it? Is that possible?
I mean, what does safe and not biased even mean, really?
Right.
So someone, Bent, is asking, what do you think chatbots will mean for the idea of writing to learn?
Or let's see, I'm not seeing that. What will it mean for what?
The idea of writing to learn. If I understand correctly, and if Bent
Yeah.
is still here, they can tell us. But I think, sort of the idea we write to learn, not we're just, versus we're writing to write. Writing is actually part of the learning process. And so if they're using AI to do the writing, where's the learning?
And I'm coming very much from the perspective that that's why we teach writing, is to help us more clearly and to understand what it means to think with really careful attention to texts, and over time developing our idea into something coherent and questioning it on many levels. And I think that it shows how that's even more important than ever, because that's how we develop our own sense of agency and how we make decisions in the world. If we don't have that capacity, then AI is not going to be able to make do that for us. And that's what we bring that AI maybe doesn't bring, is sort of an ability to use judgment that's grounded in the world as we think something through. So, my textbook frames that idea of writing to think and teaching writing in college, because this is reading and writing are basically how we seek knowledge and try to come to clearer understandings collaboratively. So the idea of the writing practice and the process, I think it's an opportunity to focus on that even more and make it. I want to invite students to reflect on, like, what did they get out of the writing process? What do they understand now that they didn't when they started writing? And sort of see how it's helping us. Yeah, and I think there are risks that, we outsource all our thinking if we're outsourcing the writing, right? So I'm not coming from the perspective of we should allow it in certain ways specifically, or embrace it means anything goes. I do think some guardrails are important, because we still want to know what's the students and what's the AI. If we want to know what the student is learning, we have to be able to distinguish. And we have to have some spaces where it is the student, and they're not always dependent on or influenced by the AI for every moment of thinking.
There was another question and some people answered it, but I thought you might have. Someone was asking if there's any university that has licensed an AI tool for free for all students, so they all have equal quality of access. And Huda was saying maybe MIT, Rebecca was saying Michigan. Oh yeah, I remember that. Michigan, they have their own locally hosted one, right? Do you know of any others?
Well, I think the big experiment that I hear about is Khan Academy, which is at the K-12 level, and that involves a chatbot that draws on GPT-4 from OpenAI, and that's being used at multiple school districts. So it's an AI sort of tutor, and it's actually, the school districts are paying quite a bit for that. So I think that some places are doing that. But I think that I would want to point out that, there's a lot of concern about equitable access, but there are these workarounds. So you can use the more sophisticated models like GPT-4 through, say, Bing Chat, which draws on it, and that's free, or Claude AI and Poe.com are free, up to a certain number of queries. It's limited, but we can have students encounter it and work with it to some extent for free already. Looking at the chat.
There's a couple more questions that I wanted to ask you, but there's
yeah,
more
I
coming
wanted
in.
to talk more about English language learners and about foreign language instruction. Of course, that's not my specialty, but that's a great point from Cecilia, that now there's connection with voice synthesis, so you can actually, and voice recognition, and I haven't tried that yet, but I know you can do on your phone with an app. You can speak to and have a conversation with a language model like ChatGPT. And so certainly, like, lots of potential just for language practice, which also, as somebody pointed out, there's that risk of, it pushes the normative standard English that's tied to the power structure even more. It reinforces that. But it also opens up some access to that people will use pragmatically. So it's that very mixed bag. And I think, but, many of these language apps are embracing it for practice. And I think what's neat about that I think I have a couple slides on that I missed, were that you can come up with examples that are really tailored to student interests. So like, if we want to teach a particular grammatical structure in English or in French, ask it for examples of that. Have the students playfully say, okay, I want examples that relate to my favorite anime series, right? So just to kind of, or more seriously tied to a class theme, so that so that we could sort of have this customization of examples in and materials or a chat session. So there is that sense of like it could be more personalized with these systems because they make that so much quicker. And then you'd still want to critique it. Like if you ask it for examples of fallacies, does it give you ones that really hold up under scrutiny if you're using those examples for critical thinking?
Anna Sayed was asking in the chat about like how well it does with creative stuff and fiction, and I think it's trope-like, but I don't know what your experience has been. Like it'll recreate every sci-fi movie.
I think that it really depends how you prompt it. Probably if you're using it, you have a really sophisticated writer, and you give it examples that are really good, and then you keep prompting it. You might, some people do find it useful as part of their process, and it doesn't just produce garbage. But I mean, I wouldn't be drawn to that personally. I haven't experimented with it, but I know that people like, I think Paul Fife has been really active in that, and Mike
Mark
Sharple,
Marino.
Mark Marino, yeah. So I think that could be interesting to experiment with. Yeah, Mark Marino had a great exercise where he had students write prompts for image generators, and the idea was that you have to be so clear and specific in your use of language in order to get it to write to do an image that really fits a vision. I'm looking at the chat. That's interesting. So this question is sort of how does it affect the sense of the students that the student has of the authority of the teacher as opposed to the language model? I mean, I would hope that that the message I would want to send is that we have to do our homework and trust ourselves and our own sense of purpose. Both, I do as a writer, and I want them to develop that as writers. So I feel this sense of I'm on the side of the students, that we're in this together. Almost we exist in contrast to this mechanical text generator. And it does create that sense. I give examples of my own writing process and how I would or wouldn't use AI. So my hope is that it would build student confidence and, looking to the instructor as a human collaborator and seeing the value of that. But I would want students to question what I'm saying as well, and check it. That's part of what I'm teaching, are the skills to question authority and question even what experts say. We don't structure classroom discussion. I mean, I don't either. I don't, typically structure a discussion around, how they have to prove me wrong or anything. Maha does. Cool. So yeah, that's interesting. So that's a great larger discussion about authority and trust and who should be questioned. But I think the message that certainly an algorithm should be questioned if we're using it for human purposes, right? We have to see and value our own ethical frameworks and sense of intent and purpose and relationship, and grounding in the sensory world, and come from a sense of the importance of that, and not be too impressed by what these systems can do.
Okay, now we're getting really deep into that discussion.
Yeah.
I think we're already more than 10 minutes past time, and I don't want to take up too much more of your time, Anna. And we're going to have you again next week, inshallah. And that session is also full. I'm assuming people just signed up for both all in one go. So, Hoda, do you want to say any last words? I know you weren't like very stable. with your-
No, I just want to say thank you, really. That's hopefully that comes through with my internet. But thank you very, very much, Anna. It's been a wonderful session, and we'll be following up with all the links and all the material you shared with us. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Having me. Very
I'm
grateful.
gonna stop the recording and